I think integrity goes an awful long way, and being transparent with people, even if you have to kind of do difficult things in your career. And I've had to do some difficult things and have tough conversations with people. But I think when you allow people to see you are genuine, you're very real, it counts for an awful lot. There's an awful lot of artificiality out there in the business world. But I think the people that I build trusted relationships with are those people who are, I can tell that their motives are good. And that real sense of integrity really shines through. So I'm Darren Mitchell. I'm the global COO at a law firm called Simmons Simmons, and we have around about 2,000 people across all of our offices in the firm. We have offices across 2 in the UK, then across Europe, Middle East, Asia. Got a very small office we opened in the US as well. But our roots are very much as a UK headquartered firm. So about half of our people, half of our business is done in the UK. And yeah, I've been here for a little over a year now. I'm in the firm's first COO, which means I'm responsible for managing all of our operations, all the business services teams which support our lawyers. And really, a major part of my role is to support our strategy, which is around becoming what we call the next generation law firm. So embracing modern concepts, both in terms of how we manage our people, how we look after our technology infrastructure, embracing a lot of the new concepts which are coming out around digitalization. So that's an exciting time for me to have joined, and plenty to do. So if I go right back to my schooling days, I was at a comprehensive secondary school on the south coast, the UK, near the New Forest. It's the kind of area I grew up in. And I was always kind of seen as relatively bright, I suppose. I always did kind of fairly well. I wouldn't say I worked particularly hard, not as hard as I probably should have done, but I seemed to kind of be able to pull it out the bag a little bit. But I kind of knew that the path that my school was on wasn't going to be necessarily good for me. Some of my friends were perhaps not in the best of influences, let's put it that way. And there was kind of a reputation, if you're going off to a sixth form college, which was the natural progression, I kind of had seen what had happened with older brothers and to see other people's influences that wasn't always positive. So I kind of was quite keen to explore what else was out there, rather than kind of keep going with the flow. And it was interesting, actually, when you start to explore it. And this is in the days pre the internet, of having to explore what else was available out there. Actually, I discovered that there were a number of good schools, often private schools, where they would make it possible for you to go, even though I didn't come from an affluent family. My background is my parents at that stage owned a small hardware shop, which was kind of fun growing up in that environment and going and playing shopkeeper from time to time. But clearly they weren't in the big bucks, and I was always very conscious that money was tight at times growing up. My dad actually then moved from that to become work for himself, just kind of installing bathrooms and kitchens and house repair and that kind of thing. So I guess you could say kind of more of the manual end of the spectrum. I kind of wanted something a bit more. I'd seen little glimpses of what might be possible. Interestingly, my aunt and my dad's sister had been one of the first to go off and do an MBA at university when that became a thing. I guess it's been probably late 70s, I guess, something like that. And I'd seen her kind of had seemingly having quite a kind of a glamorous existence in London, talking about stories of going to New York on Concorde and doing business. And there was a little bit of me was like, I kind of want to be in that world. And so I at that stage of thinking about where I would kind of develop, decided to kind of push on, and I was able to go to a private school where I got a fully funded bursary. When I kind of applied, they thought my academics were good, and I had to be interviewed. My parents had to be interviewed. I was more worried about them being interviewed than me being interviewed, I think. And the school decided that we were seen as so poor that not only did they give me kind of fully paid access to the school, but they also paid for uniform and paid for me to go on the train to get there. So I was very, very fortunate really with that. And of course that puts you in a different environment, and people talked about things and careers that just weren't really on the map where I was going to school before. And I remember doing those kind of careers days where you would fill in a form and it would come up with suggested career expectations, and it always felt like it was being downplayed. So even though lawyer came up for me as a possibility, it was always like, well, you could do this something different, which is a bit easier. Whereas, of course, you go to an environment like I went to school for my sixth form, and it was very much, well, you could go and work in the city, and you could kind of think about applying for elite universities. So that for me was really helpful. So I did think I was going to become a lawyer. I went to UCL and studied law. And actually, again, thing now I suspect it's different, but from a careers perspective, there wasn't a lot of kind of opening up and explaining how the profession worked. And I can remember in my second year suddenly discovering that a lot of my friends and peers were all applying for vacation schemes, and it just wasn't in my mind at all because I just didn't know that world. There were these names of all these law firms which kind of sounded quite funny, but meant nothing to me at all. The options I'd chosen were the options I thought sounded like fun, rather than necessarily being the ones which earn you the big bucks. So, but I kind of then realised when you look at what certainly the junior lawyers was doing, it didn't quite grab me in the same way, and I was thinking I'd wanted to be a bit more on the business side. So actually, I decided I wouldn't at that stage pursue a career in law, but rather I went into management consulting. I went to work for PwC. I deliberately chose a very niche area at PwC, which was kind of between consulting and accounting. So I had the sexy bit of becoming a management consultant, but the safe bit of getting a qualification in finance. So I studied CMA. I did that for a number of years. PwC actually then spun off their consulting wing to IBM. So I ended up kind of being on the tube one day and seeing on the back of someone's FT that I suddenly had a new employer, which is one way to find out. And so yeah, I ended up in IBM. That was not quite where I wanted to be. I spent there a couple of years there, but then decided to think of a move. And it was almost kind of by luck in some respects that the role at Clifford Chance came my way. I happened to know somebody who had worked there. So I had a call from a headhunter, suggesting it was kind of like an in-house consulting role in some respects, very analytical. And because there was a kind of this convergence of the headhunter calling me about his role, and then realizing I knew someone who worked there, it all kind of developed very quickly. And when I started at Clifford Chance, I suddenly realized I was in a bit of a sweet spot. That my background doing a law degree, I guess the commerciality which comes from doing consulting and the finance qualification suddenly for me was a bit of a winning combination. I can remember now writing something for the managing partner of that firm, who said to me, "My goodness, you write like a lawyer," and it was kind of new for them. Somebody who understood finance concepts but could translate it into something which was meaningful for lawyers. And I have to say that that's probably been the secret of my success in the legal profession. I moved quite quickly to work for him as the managing partner, as his right-hand man and his kind of strategic advisor, doing a lot of the firm strategy, advising on mergers, acquisitions, expansion, restructuring where we needed to, particularly after the financial crisis. But I was always kind of thinking, it was great. I was doing all the fun stuff. I was traveling around the world, doing all sorts of good things, but I didn't have a team. I was kind of one-man band, a bit of the secret squirrel project, always behind the scenes. And I wanted to kind of step out from that. So very open dialogue there. There wasn't the opportunity at Clifford Chance. I was very fortunate the role came up with Hogan Lovells as COO for continental Europe. And it's funny, careers are strange things at times. And those decisions to not do some of the corporate law topics at university. And I did things like Roman law, but suddenly that came good. My interview with him, we talked all about Roman law, and he was really interested in that. So we really connected just bizarrely around kind of small thing like that on my CVs. You can never quite tell what are the things which are going to help you in your career. I think imposter syndrome is something which most people have, and it's interesting. I think the world of professional services, so law firms, consultancies, you name it, are full of people who are kind of insecure overachievers. And there's a lot been written about that it actually drives people to want to succeed more and more and more. And I think it's interesting. I think when you come from a certain background, perhaps we use the word entitlement a lot, where you feel you've experienced privilege, you've not had to perhaps strive in quite the same way. I think people can understand how to fit in a bit easier. But I can tell you what I've kind of seen and experienced is there's still that inner insecurity with a lot of people, but people are able to kind of cover it up a lot more. I think I'm very fortunate. I grew up in an environment where I felt very self-affirmed in who I was, and so I've always kind of been quite in myself, quite self-confident. But at the same time, there are those moments where you go, "What on earth am I doing here?" And I can remember actually one of my early mentors when I was at PwC kind of taking me to task once because he'd invited me into a board meeting with a client, and I had just sat there in awe, feeling like, what am I doing here with all these people? We were discussing the strategy of the firm going forward, and it was like these were market moving conversations we were having. And of course, I said nothing as a relatively junior consultant. And I remember afterwards, he took me to one side and told me off in a nice way and said, "Look, you're in that room because I think you've got something to say. You've got to say it." And it was, for me, it was a very, very helpful kind of life lesson in I do have something which is valid to contribute. And just because other people might kind of look more polished and feel like they're kind of more important, actually, I've got something which is valid to put into this mix too. And I think it's true of everybody. And so if people are feeling that I'm not going to fit into that environment, I think certainly in the world we live in today, there is a lot more desire to bring in other voices. And it doesn't even matter if different accents or whatever, but I know it can feel to people like I'm different if you haven't grown up in that world. But there is increasingly a desire to bring more voices in, to bring different perspectives. Because if you take a lot of people and they've all been educated the same way or all been kind of brought up the same way, and you put 10 people in a room to kind of think through an issue, they'll all probably come up with the same answer. So we think we're getting kind of diversity of voices, but actually it can be very, very narrow. And so I would just encourage people not to feel that they don't bring something which is different and vital, because actually it's incredibly important. Certainly, speaking from my experience, I would probably say a couple of things. I think one is about always acting with integrity. I think integrity goes an awful long way, and being transparent with people, even if you have to kind of do difficult things in your career. And I've had to do some difficult things and have tough conversations with people. But I think when you allow people to see you are genuine, you're very real, it counts for an awful lot. There's an awful lot of artificiality out there in the business world. But I think the people that I build trusted relationships with are those people who are, I can tell that their motives are good. And that real sense of integrity really shines through. So that'd be probably my first point. I think my second would be something which I've kind of held dear is always focusing on delivery. If I say I'm going to do something, 99.9% of the time, I'm going to do it. Of course, I get very upset with myself if I forget something or don't deliver. But I think it's certainly something when you're starting out on your career journey, getting a reputation of being just solid, a safe pair of hands, goes an awful long way. As a new junior, you're not going to know everything about everything and set the world alight. In fact, those people can sometimes be very irritating. Those people who come in and they think they're fresh out of university, they're a hot shot, they know it all. You don't. A little humility goes a long way in this mix too. But just being really a safe pair of hands who can get things done and then carry that through your career. So for me, it's very important that people know, hopefully I've got perceived as having a lot of integrity and just delivering, getting the job done. And then if you can build on that foundation, you can always add the gloss and the shine and the expertise that comes as you progress your career.